So final day today, and again, we're going to be joined by Peter and Sandra, who are going to give us some more wisdom and some more science. I say wisdom because it really is, and I say science because it really is. I took that one from Sebastian. If you're shivering, you're shivering. If you're not, you're not. He says it far better than me, though. So after Peter's session, Peter and Sandra's session, we've then got Albert and Tiffany, who are going to make us laugh again, and just discuss and share with us, how we can actually infuse our breathwork practice with a little bit more joy and a little bit more happiness. And we've got this is amazing. For the Breathing Festival, we have another world's first. And we're excited to showcase that. So thank you to you guys. So that's the first part of the morning. And then Jeff Sorensen. Jeff, are you around? There he is. So Jeff is going to lead us again through another conscious connected breathing session. What's it about, Jeff, this one?
Connecting to your true nature. Yeah, we'll be trying to bring all the threads together from the weekend and find that union between the science and the spirituality and bringing that together to find our true nature. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jeff. Then it's lunch, honey experience, spend some time in nature, and then the final act of the afternoon. Well, penultimate final. Me and Vijay are the last act, and Marilyn are the last act. But of course, but before that, we have Manny and Elise, who are going to take us on a beautiful journey into self-connection, into spirituality, and some beautiful music and guided meditations. So, yeah. I just want to, let's just take a big breath in and let it out. Okay. Now I feel ready. Yeah. Peter, Sandra, over to you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be able to speak to you again. It's been a real honor, really, a privilege to speak to you each morning. I mean, I've never really had that kind of opportunity before where it's been every day. So thank you so much for your attention. And I surely hope that you will have learned something through our being here, hopefully. We've been learning from you. That's extremely important to us, that wherever we are, that we're learning as well. So thank you for what you've given to us. We really do appreciate that. The most important thing in my life, personally, is friendship. That's what my whole life has been about. That's it. That is the centerpiece in every single respect. And I really, truly believe that the greatest contribution that a human being can make in life is to have a friend. One friend. And to me, that's an infinite contribution to what consciousness, spirituality is about. That spirituality is best learned through having a friend, through connecting with somebody. Person to person. And since I was a little boy, that's what it's always been about for me. And in that sense, life is an adventure, because whenever you meet someone, it's unknown as to what it's going to be and where it goes. And so adventure and friendship. And the work that we do, trying to tie it back to what we're doing, it's really about, the reason I'm in breathing, we're in the field of breathing, isn't because, honestly, that we're that interested in breathing. It's really about understanding that, really, it's about, how life is a learning system, that all of life is learning. Every single cell is involved in learning. And I mean that literally. As you look at the literature, I mean, cells learn like you can't imagine. It's like that egg I was telling you about. I mean, they really learn. They collect data and they use it and they organize it and they behave in all kinds of new ways. They self-regulate. To me, that's about motivation and consciousness and being alive. And that's really why we got into breathing, is to try to bring that message forward. There's no better way to present it than to talk about it from the standpoint of breathing. We all do it, and it's fundamental to every living thing. And so that's a really useful way, a fantastic way to bring that magic forward. The magic in a living thing is extraordinary.
We also appreciate how breath is an interface. Every moment, every breath, it's constant, it's never stopping. The breathing is taking care of us when we're sleeping, when we're awake, when we're angry, when we're at rest, when we're at peace. And so to be able to interface with our physiology and what Peter's talking about with our cells and creating that chemistry, that relationship with our own chemistry as each moment passes. And it brings together a lot of the philosophies that we are all familiar with, and also just that awareness of how exquisite, right? I mean, we're such an exquisite system to be able in each moment with each breath, knowing that we can interface with our chemistry and have it can change and shift. And as we learn about ourselves, we're also having this opportunity to learn about how our bodies work and how we can be in relationship with that in a way where, let's say, rather than misunderstanding or misinterpreting our physiology, our chemistry, we can really understand more about how it works, so we can better partner with ourselves and each other.
Because what is really fundamental to our work is having a conversation with somebody. That's really what we do when we do breathing behavior analysis. We have a conversation, and we get to know that person. That person gets to learn about themselves. That's what it's about. It's not about the HH equation. Knowing about that is important, but what we actually do is, we create a relationship with the person that we're working with. That's how it works. Otherwise, it doesn't go anywhere. So it's all about consciousness and experience. And so you're going to learn a little bit more about that today. And one piece of that is, communicating with your body, respecting your body as having intelligence, and that it's conscious and it's operating. Your so-called unconscious, from our perspective, is not really an unconscious. It's a consciousness that is part of who you are, that you can get to know. And that's what we do in our work, is we help our clients get to know their own bodies from that standpoint. So I wanted to just start off with that to let you know. And then I wanted, just to start, I would like to ask Irina, who's here, who's she's a nurse in critical care, and she really understands and appreciates what fundamental respiration is about and how important it is to integrate an understanding of that and what you're doing as someone who's an expert in doing breathing work. So Irina, maybe you could say something. Go ahead.
Good morning. So as Peter said, I worked in critical care as a nurse for many years. So I want to mention something about carbon dioxide and its importance to the brain. So our brain right now is happily floating in our head and at a comfortable pressure. And there's three main components that affect this pressure. There's our brain, there's fluid that it's floating in, and blood that it's currently in our brain. When someone has a severe brain injury, the brain usually swells up, so the pressure goes up. We do things to minimize that inflammation, to decrease the pressure back to normal. We work on draining the fluid as well. But if all of those things don't work, we go to extreme measure, which is hyperventilation. And as Peter has mentioned, when we hyperventilate somebody, we decrease the blood flow to the brain because it constricts the blood vessels, so there's less blood. And it's done only to get the patient to the operating room so they can do their thing. So it's very temporary, very short, it works really fast, and it's the most effective thing that can be done. And basically, the doctors make a choice between minimizing the blood flow and killing some brain cells, or having the whole brain, most of the brain die. And that's kind of the balance that they're trying to do. And so the reason why I wanted to share this with you is so you have a greater awareness, as Vijay was talking about, as Sandra mentioned this morning, just awareness how our body functions. And when we practice our wonderful breathing techniques, we know what's actually happening inside, so we can do it in a safe manner. That's it. Thank you.
So one thing that's really important in understanding that is that, you know, they use it as a last resort, and it's extremely effective. I mean, it has the point is, as you can see, here's a nurse who works in critical care and understands the impact of carbon dioxide, that it's dramatic. I mean, it's really dramatic, how it affects your brain. And it's so important to understand that. And so I've been saying that, but hearing it from her, I think really maybe can be that much more helpful to you really appreciating how powerful that really is. Now, fundamentally what our work is about how when we sit down with someone, you know, we want to learn about how they're breathing. They want to learn about how they're breathing. They're interested in knowing how their breathing affects them, how their breathing changes under certain circumstances, how breathing may be related to various challenges they have in their life, whether it's public speaking or whether it's asthma. They want to know how breathing relates to that, how breathing interacts with all these different things. And then if there is an issue, what can they do to address it? How can they regulate differently from a breathing perspective? And it's about, again, breathing is part of who you are, how you breathe differently in different circumstances and how it affects you, and you discover that, you learn that, and you get involved in a learning process. So what we do, it really has no, we're very supportive of whatever all of you are doing, like say the Wim Hof thing. I mean, maybe it's true that if you challenge the body that way, the immune system functions better. We're not challenging any of that. We don't know that. We're just talking, what we're interested in is, what are your breathing habits? How are they affecting you? How can we help you learn new habits if that's appropriate? We challenge our physiology all the time in our lives in all kinds of ways, endless kinds of ways that can be very helpful in learning about ourselves or learning about life. We challenge our physiology right and left, whether it's breathing or whatever it is, climbing Mount Everest. I mean, you challenge your body extremely, and you learn all kinds of things and everything. It may not be good for you to climb Mount Everest without oxygen, but people do it, and they learn about themselves, and it contributes to their consciousness and their sense of self and all kinds of things. So we're not saying, this, that, or the other thing. We're looking at how do you breathe, how does it affect you, and how can you make a change. It's about learning. Everything we do is about learning new behaviors, and specifically breathing behaviors. So, and the other important point here is that we're interested in optimal respiration and acid-base balance. We're interested in the relationship between breathing and respiration. And there is such a thing as optimal respiration. And we compromise respiration all the time. It's a fact of life. Like we compromise all kinds of aspects of our lives. We're constantly compromising ourselves. And we learn through that compromising effort. Okay, so that's important. So we say to you, you know, when you're doing breathing work, it's important to think about respiration. And it is, if you don't consider respiration, then you may not be looking at all kinds of things that are playing a major role in that person's life. And, you know, you're doing breathing work, so we would hope that you would also address respiration and understand how the breathing work you're doing is having an impact on that respiratory process. Because it's so, as you saw earlier, I mean, it's amazing how respiration plays a role in the health of your overall physiology. And you looked at that list of symptoms. I mean, that's incredible what breathing can do. I mean, that was an amazing list. And that's not something I made up. That's just out of the literature. It's just there. You know, it's not my theory or anything, or our theory. It's the way it is. Anyway, picking up from there, I would like to talk to you about, first of all, there's some references here that you can take note of. This is an important article of ours that appeared in the Journal of Holistic Healthcare Integrative Medicine last summer that kind of summarizes a lot of the things that we do. It's called Embodied Breathing Habits, Aligning Breathing Mechanics with Respiratory Chemistry. And that's really what we've been talking about. And that, you know, that would be a good reference for you to take a look at if you're interested in our work. And then we have the new book that has just come out. It'll be available in paperback in a few weeks. It's called CAPNO Learning, an Introductory Guide. And it's about, you know, it's a practical book. It gives you the basics of what you need to know about breathing and respiration. And then there's like 18 practicums built into it where you look at respiration in relationship to teaching people to breathe differently, to learn new habits and so on. And if you ever have a CAPNO trainer or something, those 18 practicums in there show you basically how to do capnography work while you're involved in whatever breathing practice you may have. So I wanted you to know that. Okay, so now it's just
Peter,
kind of...
I'm
yes,
just wondering, is the
please.
book available digitally at this point?
Pardon?
Is the book available online?
Yeah, you can go to betterphysiology. There's various places, but you go to betterphysiology.com, and there's something here that says education at the top, and you click on education, and you'll see book. You can get it there, but that's a digital version of it, and but it'll be in paperback very, very soon, if you're interested. So, so we're going to get specific now, and I'd like to give you, first of all, before I get into talking about carbon dioxide biofeedback and negative practice, which is, you know, a way of essentially addressing issues around hypocapnia. And you notice we don't use the word hyperventilation because it's too restrictive. Hypocapnia is just a condition. It's non-judgmental. It's a condition. It's a CO2 deficiency. That's what it is. So we talk about it from that point of view. But I would like to, at this point, to at the same time introduce to you the notion of the difference between self-intervention and self-regulation with an example, which will take us into the biofeedback and the negative practice. If you, let's say someone has a headache issue. They go to work, they're fine, but whenever they get into a certain situation with their colleagues at work, they find themselves really frustrated and tense, you know, and really difficult for them. They don't really enjoy working where they are, thinking about changing their job, you know. And they get a headache. Every time that happens, they get this headache, horrific headache. Okay, and so, and it's become a serious problem at work. It's getting in the way of their work. So they go and they talk to the corporate trainer or to, a health person, human resources health person or something. And they decide, well, the headache is because of this horrible stress you're experiencing here. So they see the stress as being the cause of the headache. Of course, they don't know how the stress can produce a headache. Why would stress produce a headache in you, but not in you? I mean, she gets a headache, he doesn't. And they have maybe the same level of stress. What is it that's going on there? Well, it may be that with that headache, someone says, what you need is stress management. You need relaxation. And if you can reduce that stress, you can get rid of the headache, okay? So this person then goes to a stress management program where they learn to relax, and sure enough, they find that the headache is gone whenever they're relaxed. So whenever they think they're going to get a headache, they do their relaxation. It may involve breathing as well. Some kind of, usually relaxation almost invariably includes some kind of breathing. And so they go through this, and everyone thinks it's all about stress. But behind the scenes, you and I know more, okay? We'll assume that there's a different kind of dynamics. And that is that, let's say I'm this person who has the headache, so I can kind of act it out. So that when I have the headache, what I do, as someone in here told me earlier about their own breathing, is that this person was telling me that she doesn't know what else to do when she gets stressed but to take control of her breath. So I take control of my breath whenever I get stressed. And when I do that, there are a lot of things around it. I may worry about air. I may think I need to take larger breaths. There may be thought processes and so on. But I take over, and then the reflex control is gone. So that HH equation now is just kind of moving around because the reflexes that know what to do can't do it. And I end up overventilating, and I reduce blood flow to my brain, okay? And so I get hypoxia in the brain, and I have low blood sugar in the brain. And that low blood sugar, which everyone knows when you have low blood sugar, you can get a headache easily. So when we have people overbreathe, very often it brings on a headache right away. So now you have this reduced blood sugar, reduced oxygen, hemoglobin isn't delivering the oxygen properly, and then get this headache. Okay, so the headache is really coming on not because of the stress, but because of how you've learned, breathing-wise, to respond to the stress. The problem is the habit that you've learned. It's not the stress itself in this example. Okay, it's how you've learned to respond to it. So what we do in our work is we try to see, is there a breathing issue? Is the breathing playing a role in this headache? So we interview the person, talk to the person, we work together to try to discover what's going on. And sure enough, when we do the work and we look at the capnometer and so on, the capno trainer, and we work with them where they overbreathe and they get a headache as soon as they overbreathe, and then they restore good breathing and the headache goes away, and they say, yeah, this is what happens to me when I'm in this situation. I notice I start to get a little dizzy. And we have this whole conversation and we kind of discover what's going on. And so what we then do is we say, well, there's a breathing habit issue that you have here that is mediating these headaches. Because, we don't really want you, as you were saying to me, I say to you, you're my client, life is stressful and, life is challenging. You don't want to get a headache when you participate in life the way that is usual and normal, where there is stress and different challenges. You want to be able to be stressed without a headache. We want to address the cause of the headache rather than just treat it with some kind of technique that's going to keep the headache at bay by getting rid of the trigger for the habit. The trigger of the habit is the stress. It's a learned response to the stress. So in stress management, you're just controlling the trigger. You're not addressing the habit. You're just making sure the trigger is not present. And you always have to relax to be able to get rid of the headache. So what we do is we work with you so that when in fact you're stressed, you're allowing that breathing. You're not in there trying to regulate and control it, again, unconsciously. And it can take real work, as we'll see, to overcome that. But the point here is, in the end, you can be stressed without a headache. You can go into all kinds of challenges in life without getting that headache, and without breathing in a way that you get brain fog and everything else that may make the stress worse because you can't seem to function, because you don't have any blood in your brain, so to speak, and you're a basket case. So you address the habit, change the habit so you don't breathe that way anymore. That's what we do, you see. You don't breathe that way anymore, unless you want to, for some reason. You want to overventilate on purpose, to do whatever it is you're trying to accomplish? Great.
So
But
after
this is a
Peter,
choice.
he's talking to you about meeting one-on-one, and then in addition to that, being able to have an instrument at home so you can do your own exploration. So maybe you leave a session with some activities you might both decide make sense based on your findings, and then collect data on yourself while you're at home, putting yourself actually in challenges and getting curious about what is going on with my breathing behavior, and having a window with being able to see your physiology moving live, your breathing live on the screen, moment to moment, live action. So you can now take yourself into different situations and noticing from the inside out how you're experiencing your physiology, your body, how your muscle behaviors might be shifting. Maybe there's more muscle tension in certain situations. Is my breathing playing a role in that? Could that be a precursor to bringing on the headache as my neck is getting more tense? So maybe I can stem the headache from even coming on, and now I can watch my CO2 and help support myself, giving myself feedback in the process, and bring my findings back to whoever I might be working with at the time, and we explore together and refine my understanding of what's happening with my own chemistry and different opportunities that I might continue to explore. So eventually I become independent from my provider. I can be empowered and really develop that strong partnership using instrumentation to take care of myself. I don't have to believe, oh, do this, do that. No, I can actually check.
So the inside out is really what it's about, as she was saying, as you'll see, rather than this outside in manipulative kind of thing, trying to get your breathing right. That's usually the problem. Someone's trying to get the breathing right. You don't need to get the breathing right. You need to address a habit if it's getting in the way of the basic intelligence in the system. And that's an inside-out process, as you'll see. Anyway, there's the intervention, just going back to the example I gave you, the intervention is stress management. It's a self-intervention, okay? Learning a new habit is about self-regulation, where it becomes automatic, becomes part of who you are. That's really what self-regulation is about. Self-intervention, you're always having to come in and intervene, to introduce something that's going to make things better. So the one approach, the stress management, was the self-intervention, and then learning a new habit was the self-regulation. Okay, so I'm going to now talk to you about very specific negative practice and biofeedback in doing this kind of work. I was just thinking, there was one in these slides, there's a couple of other examples. I just want to back up here for a minute that you can see on the slides later on here, but it's very relevant to what I just talked about, is this prescriptive kind of an approach where you have an self-intervention. We avoid prescription. It's not about prescription. It's about you and what you've learned and what you can learn subsequently. And that's not prescriptive in nature. And if you use a prescriptive technique, you usually overlook the history of the issue. You overlook the components of the behaviors, the behaviors that are involved in the habit. You overlook the triggers. You just kind of implement some kind of technique you think is going to help that person. And it may or may not have anything to do with the habit. And so here's an example of a very well-known Buteyko practitioner. who came through our program. And I want to just go ahead to a slide here where there's a quote from him. Just keep going and a little bit further, just keep going, a little bit more, a little more. Okay, stop, oops, go back. Okay. This person is a Buteyko person, been to Buteyko for years. Everybody knows who he is. And he discovered, because he never used a capnometer, that he was a chronic overbreather, that he had really low levels of CO2. And they're supposed to be experts, you know, in the regulation of CO2 with a controlled pause and all these different things that they do. But here he is, this very well-known man who really has low levels of CO2. And so there was an exam in our program that he went through. And the question was, in the exam is, what did you learn from a demonstration with him, you know, the Buteyko worker? And then he had to answer the question himself. And here's what he wrote. And he gave me permission to do this, so just so you know. What can I say here? I'm surprised and disturbed that my CO2 levels are consistently low. As a Buteyko practitioner, I expected them to be normal. I see now that the low level keeps me from some very difficult feelings. That when my CO2 levels go up, I start to feel afraid of these feelings that are buried in my low levels. I am more comfortable with being hypocapnic. The motivation is to avoid feelings and emotions. And the reinforcement, that is the outcome, is the feeling of being in control. So you see, the Buteyko technique doesn't address these things. It doesn't address the habit at all. The Buteyko technique didn't address the history of the issue. It didn't address any of the components, the behavioral components, or the motivation behind them, and so on. And so there's another slide, if we go a little bit further ahead, one more, okay, stop here. Then there was another question on the same exam, and he answered that. It says, some practitioners believe that overbreathing is the result of mouth breathing, and that nasal breathing is necessarily its solution. A mechanical explanation that says one physical action triggers another. From a behavioral or psychological perspective, however, in some cases, nasal breathing might help overcoming overbreathing, yes, but in other cases, not at all. In fact, a lot of times I find someone who's overventilating, I ask them to open their mouths, and the CO2 level goes back to normal. Here is his answer, because the question is explain this. So he says, I can use myself as an example. I was always a mouth breather until I took the Buteyko training. Now I only breathe through my nose, but am an obvious overbreather based on my chemistry so far, and unable to use an intervention to shift my hypocapnia. From a psychological viewpoint, overbreathing while nasal breathing continues to serve my avoidance of the pain of my childhood. So the fact that if you're overbreathing because you're trying to control your feelings and your memories to avoid pain, the fact that you shift from your mouth to your nose isn't going to have any effect. Why would it? The motivation is still there to overventilate to achieve the same outcome. It hasn't changed. So no matter how you might teach someone to breathe, they're going to keep overbreathing. That habit is still there. It hasn't been addressed. So he says here, from a psychological viewpoint, overbreathing while nasal breathing continues to serve my avoidance of the pain of my childhood. The behavior is still in place, and this is not something you know about, but this is a type 1 habit. That's irrelevant, what I'm talking about here. But in any event, you can see this is the psychology that's embedded in it. So let's take a look at some of the things that we do, specifically negative practice and biofeedback, and talk to you. We'll stop on that slide. Go back to that slide. We'll stop start here. If you could, well, that's good. Somehow a slide went off the chart down here, but on my slides it doesn't. But anyway. What we want to do here is to teach someone to take ownership of the habit so that they're not afraid of the consequences of the bad habit. Many people don't want to focus on their breathing because when they do, they get into trouble. They almost have a phobia of breathing itself. They don't want to go there. Okay? So the idea is to take ownership of that habit so you're not afraid of it. It's yours, and you can implement it or not. And that's really what negative practice is. You become an expert at performing the wrong thing. So then you can undo the wrong thing. This is a technique that comes from behavior therapy. It's not something we invented. We're just using it around breathing behavior. It's used for all kinds of things, negative practice. And in that process of practicing the wrong thing, you become aware of a whole number of things. Let's take a look at some of these things. And you learn how to overbreathe. And then in that process, you start to be able to take charge of it.
Because you're becoming aware of doing it. So you know what you're doing, you can do what you want.
That's correct. Exactly. So in that process, you learn to to engage that rapidly and get back rapidly. And getting back rapidly means 2 or 3 minutes. Once you've lost the carbon dioxide, you don't get it back in the next breath. It takes quite a while. So you learn, which pertains to what she's saying here, you learn to recognize the symptoms, the physiological changes and the psychological changes associated with the hypercapnia. So I usually feel like when I get going, like I do, I get so emotional, I get so involved and I do all this crazy kinds of stuff when I get going. And I'll get hypocapnic because I essentially get out of sync, just like the woman who, when she ate, she would eat too fast and she'd get desynchronized and she'd get trapped, that example I gave you. Well, what happens is I can feel tightness in my temple start to show up. Right in here, I get a little tension, and I feel a little dizziness coming on, okay? And I've learned to detect that. So you learn to recognize the symptoms through this practice of overventilating on purpose. We have a whole technique where you practice going back and forth. There's a whole practicum on how to do that, and I'll mention a little bit about that. And then the air hunger in that process, it's like getting rid of fear. If you're afraid of dogs and you keep exposing yourself to dogs, pretty soon the fear goes away if you keep doing it and you do it properly. Same thing is true of air hunger. It's a conditioned response, like Pavlov's dogs, and salivation. Fear is a conditioned response. So is air hunger, where you feel like you're not getting enough oxygen. And so you extinguish that motivation in this process of negative practice. And then you extinguish the fear of entering hypocapnia itself, because people are afraid of the symptoms. They get dizzy and they feel like they're losing control. They feel like they're going to have a panic attack because they're losing control. So once they can get in and they feel like they're not losing control, they aren't really losing any control. They're just dizzy. They say, I'm dizzy, and that's it. It's just, I'm dizzy. Big deal. Okay, so you desensitize, the person gets desensitized to the symptoms of hypocapnia, and then they start to lose their fear of paying attention to their breathing. A lot of times what they're afraid of are those hypocapnic symptoms, and they don't want to focus on their breathing. So now they expose themselves to those symptoms intentionally, where they desensitize to them, and they no longer respond to them the way they did before. So that happens in that process.
There's also a wonderful opportunity of moving into the space of I'm not right or wrong. I'm not doing this right or wrong. You can release judgment, and then again, partnering with your body to be an explorer, as we've talked about, and and the self-judgment can go away, and because now you can learn to navigate with your breathing in ways that will support better respiration or lower your respiration whenever you want.
So then there's all kinds of emotions that get connected to different ways of breathing. So people are afraid to breathe certain ways. Like I can't breathe fast. It really upsets me. You know, you get these explanations like, oh, it's sympathetic. You know, when you breathe fast, you're charging up the sympathetic nervous system. So when you breathe slow, you become parasympathetic. How many of you have heard of that? Almost everybody. Well, we just shake our heads when we hear that. I mean, where are they coming from? I mean, when I walk fast, I mean, that's more sympathetic than when I walk slow. I mean, I do all kinds of things fast or slow in my life. Breathing's just another one. What happens around the breathing is what you've learned in terms of how you interpret your experience. Some people, when they breathe slow, get terrified. When they breathe slow, I mean, it's the last thing on earth for them. Why? Because they feel like they're not getting enough air. They feel like this is terrible. They can't breathe like that. They're suffocating. The next person breathes fast and they go, oh my God, there's something really wrong. I mean, this is terrible. I shouldn't be breathing like that. This is shallow and bad breathing. Well, if you're breathing fast, you have to breathe shallow to have the right amount of CO2 level. Shallow just means you're taking small breaths. Unless you're aborting the breaths, it's that they're just small breaths. What's wrong with a small breath? Nothing. Nothing. But this person's afraid of that, and they're told that that's no good, and they need to make sure their breaths are deeper and slower and all that, and they think they don't know how to breathe, and they need to learn how to breathe. The system already knows exactly, precisely how it needs to take place. But the body, remember, learns bad habits just like you do. And that's one of the things we have to focus on, are those habits that the body learns. So anyway, while in this process, you desensitize yourself to the different kinds of breathing, so you're comfortable breathing slow or, however it is. And then you learn to maintain good CO2 levels while you're relaxed and while you're challenged. Now you may say, what do you mean relaxed? Obviously the CO2 level is going to be good if you're relaxed, and it's going to be not so good if, you're being challenged. Well, you know what? That isn't really true. A lot of people, when they relax, that's when they overventilate. They really relax and all of that, and that's really trouble for them. Really, really hard. From a respiratory point of view, when they're busy, they're busy and they're doing things and they're all around and everything, their CO2 levels are perfect. But as soon as they sit down and kick back, the CO2 level goes off. We find this over and over and over again. It's a type A type personality, They're really into doing everything, and this is what life's about for them. But when they have to sit back and kind of appreciate themselves and the people around them, then they start to overventilate. So, you have to look at the individual and see what's true for them. That's what our work's about. What is true for you? Okay, so so you want to be able to maintain CO2 level regardless of whether you're stressed or you're bored or you're excited or you feel friendly or you feel antagonistic or whether you feel cold or whether you feel tired or stressed or whatever. The system was built so that you can maintain good respiration. Those reflexes will do the job if you let them do the job.
It also creates a great opportunity for multiple types of emotions that might emerge, or different sensations, not necessarily just one emotion or one thought, fear, anxiety, joy. You can explore the gamut, so there may be many layers of exploration that arise as breathing changes. There's resiliency in the way emotions shift and change too, and the learning that's embedded in that type of habit, whether it's a breathing habit or a certain emotional habit you might have where you're drawn to a particular situation because you like the way you feel, and in that situation you may breathe in a particular way. There's so many different ways to approach it, and that makes it a very rich environment to be able to be available to yourself.
And it makes it really exciting for the practitioner. I mean, it really is personal and interesting and fascinating, and you always come across something you never, ever expected. I mean, it happens
Yeah.
to this day. I've been doing it for 40 years. It's incredible what you come across. We did it, I was working a while back, just a short time ago, on the internet doing a demonstration with someone like we did, with Spencer, but it was on the internet. And this person, I looked at the breathing. I mean, this just kind of shocked me. I was looking at the breathing, and this person was breathing like at 3 or 4 breaths per minute. And usually what that is a sign of is someone intentionally trying to impress you. Okay? So I asked the guy, I said, are you doing some kind of technique that you've learned about breathing? I suspected that was the case. He said, no. Why? Why do you ask? I said, well, usually when I see this, someone is trying to implement a technique. He said, no, I wasn't trying to do anything. And I noticed that the breaths were really, the exhales were extremely long, really long. And that usually means someone's pushing, And I was going, really? And I said, well, let's explore your exhale and what you're experiencing. He'd had an injury in his neck and everything. And I noticed that neck, and I talked to him about his injury in the neck, just like we were talking about the injury that Spencer had. And it turned out that when I had him focus on the exhale, rather than having nervousness at the end of the exhale, he felt this incredible peace at the end of the exhale. And he said, I found myself with air hunger, and it annoyed me. I didn't want to take a breath. I didn't want to breathe. And then we talked about it and discovered it was the pain that he had experienced when we took a breath. He would feel pain historically, and he would avoid the pain by not breathing. So he would keep the breath out where he felt great until he had to take the breath. Now, he had a real over-breathing problem as well, mixed in with it. You have mixed habits. It was a very interesting case. You could actually watch it. I think it's on YouTube. But anyway, then what you do is you work with people where they change their breathing mechanics while maintaining the right CO2 levels. You can breathe fast, you breathe slow, take bigger breaths, smaller breaths, and maintain the right CO2 level. And then you learn to maintain the chemistry in the presence of triggers that were bringing on the overbreathing. You now learn to maintain the good CO2 levels in the presence of those triggers. That's extremely important. That's why working with the person out in the field, out in their lives, their real lives out there, on the track where they're running. A lot of athletes, when they start doing their sport, that's when they overbreathe. That's the trigger. The trigger is effort. That's what triggers the overbreathing. That's the trigger. And a lot of athletes do that. They're in great condition. They're fantastic and everything. But as soon as they get out there, they start to overventilate right away. And now it compromises their performance. They lose a race. Or someone is standing on the edge of a diving board. They're in the Olympics, and they're here, and they're going to do this, whatever it is. And they're trying to rehearse it, but they can't because they're hypocapnic. They can't rehearse it. And they mess up the dive.
Yes, so there's all this psychology embedded in that, in addition to the physical movements that Peter is showing us here and enacting. In the movement, there's psychology in the movement itself, in the rehearsal, and also, again, all these layers, concern about performance, wanting to perform, overperforming, and you get to share and discuss that with the people that you're working with and with yourself, learning how to create that conversation without judgment and moving into curiosity. Oh, my body's saying this to me, or I had this thought. My mom used to talk to me that way. I wonder if I can let that go. There's all kinds of wonderful opportunity, very rich. Great to let go of the judgment.
We had a Buteyko worker, another Buteyko worker, who had been doing Buteyko for 10 years from New Zealand. And she was a real expert at doing the work, and she was in one of our programs, and she discovered that she overbreathed all the time, another Buteyko worker. And she found out, and she's great at the exhale, but that's neither here nor there. It's the habit that she had. Where did the habit come from? Well, you just ask her questions, have a conversation with her. She'd never bothered to do that, to have a conversation with herself about her breathing, aside from just using the techniques. She had all these techniques. What it was is that when she was in her diaphragm, she felt, she was a diaphragmatic breather, but she felt trapped when she breathed in her diaphragm. And she felt like a prisoner. So she had to take larger breaths that would free her from that sense of restriction in the diaphragm. So whenever she did that, she was losing carbon dioxide. And she'd been doing it for years, never understanding. Again, Buteyko technique simply doesn't address the habit. No one bothered to ask her some simple questions. And that's what we do in this kind of work that we call ABA training, which is a negative practice. Like in her case, she needed to practice doing breathing in the diaphragm, and then breathing in the chest, then breathing in the diaphragm. We're trying to teach her to like the small diaphragmatic breath. You have to like it or you're not going to do it. It's called preference training. It's the psychology of it. It isn't the physicality of it, it's the psychology of it. She's feeling trapped. You have to address that so the small breath becomes a relief. It becomes preferable to these large breaths that she was automatically taking.
And then in addition to the technique of shifting small to large, large to small, the opportunity then to shift again to what would it be like to partner with the reflex itself? What if I allow the reflex to operate? What does that feel like? And how am I going to psychologically relate to that physical sensation? So shifting, as Peter was touching on earlier, from we use learning approaches to then allowing the reflexes to operate and then being able to interrupt the reflexes and returning to the reflexes. So there's that trust that we build with our body and strengthening our partnership with reflexes.
That's a real key, is trust. You see, we're not talking about mechanics, right? We're talking about trust. Breathing, so the breathing can really proceed in a way that's constructive from a respiratory point of view. We talk about trust. We don't talk about some procedure that you practice back and forth to get it all right. It's about your experience, trusting. So here, the last two things, you establish the symptoms, the hypocapnic symptoms, as triggers for new habits. Like when I experience a little bit of dizziness when I'm talking, within a couple minutes, everything is gone. I'm back to normal, because those experiences themselves become triggers for allowing the breath. I end up allowing the breath. As soon as I feel that, I don't really do anything. I just notice it. And the next thing I know, the whole thing is gone. It's self-regulating. And then intervention techniques are important. It's not as if they have no value. They are extremely important. Because if you find yourself in a crisis situation where maybe the old habit shows up, like we all regress, from a Freudian perspective, you've all heard of regression and how people regress. Well, in behavioral science, we don't call it regression. It's called spontaneous recovery, where the habit reappears for various reasons that we certainly don't have time to go into here, but they reappear, so you need that self-intervention to step in if necessary. And if you've done negative practice, you know exactly what to do. So it's not something you're afraid of. You just implement it.
And then you also know what it feels like to partner with the reflexes as well. So once that's established, it's much easier to know my reflexes they're not going to go away. They're there with me, and that you're strengthening that partnership. It's similar also for people who are runners or they've done a sport where you get into that flow state and you're not having to try and work so hard. You've done the training, and now you can go into the flow. The flow could be a metaphor for partnering with your reflexes.
So here's how we would do the biofeedback. Okay, you've been through other things before. You've been assessed, and you've gone through the process of learning about your breathing and the issues. And we've created a learning plan. You and I together work together. We create a learning plan. It's a plan based on who you are and what you've learned and what you might want to learn. That's what we do. It's not like we come in and use this protocol and that and so on. We work out a plan together. So the part of the plan in this example is that you're going to do biofeedback with yourself. You can do it at home. You can do it, with me. You can do it wherever. But it takes a lot of practice to accomplish these things. And what we do is we sit you down. What was that?
It's fun.
Yeah. You sit down.
It is. It is. It's an adventure.
And let's say now you've gotten to, you can maintain your CO2 level you're at 37 or something like that. And now what I'll do, or you do with yourself based on a book, our book or whatever it is, you say, you notice how you're feeling. You notice your emotions. You notice your hands. You notice your forehead. You notice how clear things are or not, whatever. You try to get into your psychological space. Again, psychological space. Do you have air hunger? Do you feel comfortable? Do you feel relaxed? And so you do kind of a checklist on yourself as to how you're feeling. So now what you do is you lower the CO2 level on purpose, a little at a time, gradually, so you know how you did it, from 37 down to 33. So you slowly work it down, so you notice how you accomplish it, because you do it. You go down to 33, you stay there, and you say, now, are there any changes? How do I feel in my consciousness right now? Are there any shifts? Are my hands sweating? Do I feel any anxiety? Am I a little bit nervous? What do my temples feel like? Do I have any dizziness? And we've already been working together with that checklist you saw, where you did an interview. So you know what to focus on, because we went through an interview together. You checked off all the different things and the different situations in which you experienced them, and so on, like you saw. And so you try to get in touch with whatever changes occur. Maybe initially you don't really notice the changes, but with practice you can really notice the slightest physical changes. And biofeedback is about getting in touch with your physiology, which usually means that emotions will emerge. When you start to get in touch with your physiology, almost inevitably emotions emerge. So you have to be ready to talk to the person about how they're feeling. So in this case, the person notices what happens at 33, and they stay there maybe for 3 minutes. Now they got to get back to 37. And that can be a real challenge. People may really struggle with it initially to try to undo what they did. And they get back to 37. If you can go 37 to 33, 37 to 33, and you start noticing how your body changes, how your psychology changes, then you go from the next time you go down, rather than 33, you go down to 28 or 30 or something, down to a lower level yet. And then symptoms will really start emerging for most people. And then you notice a difference between 33 and 28. And the original 37. So you get down to 28, then you work yourself to 33, maybe 33 down to 28, 28 back up to 37, maybe 37 to 40. And you keep working these different levels where you experience the changes in your physiology and your psychology. Always remember, is this similar to what happens when I'm public speaking? Is this similar to what happens when I take an exam, like she was talking about? And you're relating it to your life while you're going through this process. And this is really what the biofeedback is about. You're looking for the emotions that emerge. You look for the physical changes. You learn to, all the things that I described here, is you engage in these things as you're doing it. And once you have control of it, where you can lower it, raise it, you're familiar with what it feels like and so on, then you can introduce stressors, like you get on the telephone, you have it on your computer and you can see everything, because you can have a little box up in the corner that shows your CO2 level, and you have this challenging phone conversation. And you can see your CO2 level while that's happening. You can check in with it so that you test yourself in real life situations, because having a good habit in your bedroom is meaningless. The idea is to have a good habit when you're out there in the real world where you're performing some task that's critical to your profession. That's where you want to be sure that things are happening properly. So you got to get out in the field. That's why we developed the instrument we did, the way we did, so it can be used in the field most anywhere. Okay, so you can be out in the field where you can really learn to and make that habit a part of who you are. It's fundamental to the work, that self-regulatory end of things.
And sometimes it's hard to go right into a stressor, right? So you might choose, make a list for yourself. These are most challenging. I'm going to choose some simpler stressors, like maybe I'm going to overbreathe and I'm going to do laundry. And then when the laundry is dry, during drying, I'm going to do my recovery. And then I'm going to fold the laundry and put it away. And notice what's going on with your physical sensations, the way you move in the space. It's a safer space. You're doing an action, an activity, or you're moving in space. You have the instrumentation on your person or somewhere in the space, because you don't have to be tethered to a computer. You could be moving around, and then build up to more and more fun challenges.
And you can collect all the data. It goes to the cloud, so you can collect all the data and go look at it and create reports for yourself.
Yeah, you can look at it later. You don't have to go, oh my God, am I okay right now? you just checking in with yourself and then reflect later. It's kind of
we
an
work with
active
people who are
meditation.
going through surgery, like major dental surgery. They maintain perfect CO2 levels. People have anxiety attacks in a dental environment. But by regulating that
drill
CO2,
is going,
it stays really in place. Literally through implant surgery, I did recently. With a cell phone, we did a cell phone application. We coached this gentleman all the way through his surgery, and then he really lost his fear, his dental fear. He was able to get through this major surgery without any challenge. He didn't feel breathless. He didn't feel panicked about losing control anymore. Anyway, let's go to the last slide, I think. Oh, let's back up 1 second here. See, let's take a look at this. Self-regulation is about modifying and learning breathing habits. It's about learning breathing habits. Self-intervention is about managing breathing habits, learning breathing techniques. In our work, we're talking about learning techniques. That's what the work is about. Learning techniques, not breathing techniques. So self-interventions often involve breathing techniques. So what we do is about learning. So it says here, self-regulation is about finding causes, disengaging old habits, learning new habits. Self-intervention is about controlling symptoms, blocking habits, and avoiding habits. Very different. The next slide. Okay, self-intervention is about manipulating breathing physiology with emphasis on techniques for symptom management, that is prescriptive intervention. Self-regulation is about identifying and learning new physiological breathing habits with the emphasis on cause, and here's the inside out, intuitive regulation. It's inside out. It's not about imposing something on the system. It's about being the system in a new way. So next slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, again, learning the right mechanics. A lot of people have this emphasis, you got to learn the right mechanics. Teaching clients the right mechanics may be both irrelevant, have nothing to do with the issue, and be misleading. If someone is overventilating because they're trying to avoid emotions and memories, what does diaphragmatic breathing have to do with that? Nothing. You're going to teach them diaphragmatic breathing? No. The problem is they have this habit that's associated with controlling their feelings, and they breathe that way to control their memories and their feelings. If you want to address the issue, you got to find out what's going on, not just say, diaphragmatic breathing's good, you need to learn to do that. or slow down your breathing. What has that got to do with why this person is breathing the way they are? You say you need to learn how to breathe differently. What are you talking about? This person is breathing that way because there's an outcome that is extremely important to that person, to regulate their emotions and to regulate their memories. And you're going to teach them diaphragmatic breathing and slow breathing? What's that got to do with anything? Nothing. Nothing. So it can be completely irrelevant, and it can be misleading in that you basically inform people that, they're not breathing right and they ought to be breathing like this. And this is just, it's really unfortunate. You're not really providing the person with anything helpful, and it may be misleading. But sometimes prescriptive techniques, a lot of times, they can work to an extent. You say, all I know is that it works. I do it, and it works. But you're not asking the question as to why it works. And so maybe the technique works out of 1 out of 5 people because slowing down the breathing desensitizes them to the end of the breath, so they're more likely to allow the breath and learn to not overbreathe. But if you really looked at the elements of what is going on and understand the psychology of it, it could help a lot more people, because for a lot of people, slowing down the breath is no solution at all. It doesn't address the habit. In some cases, it might actually address the habit to some degree. And so the technique becomes useful, but not for the reasons that you might think. It's not about the breathing being slow. It's about losing fear of the whole end of the breathing process. So habits can get addressed incidentally. So practicing good mechanics may mean nothing more than repetitive exercises that attest to one's skills to consciously manipulate breathing behavior. If learning history is overlooked, training will fail. The governing factors will continue to govern. The idea is to get to know the person, to get to know yourself, if you're the client, is to get to know yourself from a breathing perspective, the history of what it's about, how it's serving you, that is the outcomes of whatever it is you're doing, and how you might learn something different. That's really what our work is about. It's not like teaching you the right breathing techniques. It's about being healthy from a breathing perspective, physically and mentally, not to say that you may do all kinds of wild things with your breathing that from a respiratory point of view is compromising, but so what? We do this all the time in our lives. We compromise ourselves consistently. We're always challenging ourselves. No one's saying you shouldn't do that. I do it. I did it all the time in my life. Constantly challenge my physical being, and I learned things by doing it. No one's saying that you can't. We're just talking about habits, how they work against us, how they work for us, where do they come from, how do you discover them, and so on. That's really what the work is about.
And to be able to have the opportunity to recover quickly if you want. That's a really wonderful skill to have for yourself. So if you're going to go into a situation, I can take this on and I can recover quickly if I want to. It builds more trust in your own system. What is recovery for me? What am I considering that I need to pay attention to when I want to recover? So if I'm an athlete, my indicators and my cues for me may be very different than if I'm wanting to recover after having a difficult conversation with someone, for example. That may be a different recovery. So what Peter was talking about with exploring and learning what my cues are for me when I'm challenged, in this example, I'm talking about recovery, what I might do to help connect to my reflexive breathing, to allow myself to partner with good respiration so that I'm getting good blood flow, I'm getting good oxygen distribution. My physiology is supporting me as I'm moving into recovery. And I can feel the shifts in my consciousness and in my body, in my thinking process. And for many of us, as we practice, it becomes reflexive. In that process, we might be trying different learning tools to get to reflexive breathing so that my body is breathing me. I am in partnership with my breath. I'm not separate from my reflexes. But sometimes when I challenge myself, I am going to move into maybe dissociation. I'm going to feel breathless. I'm not going to feel like I'm getting enough air. And so knowing that, I don't need to be afraid. I'm aware of what's happening, and I can learn to partner with my reflexes and through learning tools, learning techniques, in part to move towards reflexive breathing. Because it's very hard. If I'm going to be an Olympic athlete, I'm not going to just get up there and do the perfect dive like Peter was showing us earlier. I'm going to need to practice and do rehearsal so it's intuitive, and I have this partnership now with good respiration and physiology as I go through the motions of uncoupling reflexive breathing and recoupling, moving in and out of that. So I have more choices.
In general, we have an acronym we call AIR, and AIR stands for one thing, I for another, R for another. But what it boils down to is self-observation. That's how we begin in our work. Most people don't know how to self-observe. I'll bet half of you at least don't know how to self-observe, even though you're experts in what you do. What people do is they immediately manipulate. When you ask them to observe their breath, almost invariably, they tell you what they did rather than what they saw. I always say, hey, this is about self-observation we were just doing. They say, oh, I didn't realize. So self-observation is key, and then self-intervention, where self-exploration. So you have self-observation, self-exploration, which involves a lot of interventions, playing to discover and learn your breath, become aware of all the different dimensions of your breath, and then ultimately self-regulation. So we go self-observation, self-exploration to self-regulation is what we do. Okay, well, this is some of the things about self-regulation. Intuitive learning replaces manipulative learning. Dysfunctional signs like symptoms become triggers for new habits. Clients learn intuitive sensitivity to detect physical, psychological nuances. Clients learn self-reinforcement, that is, new ways of talking about themselves. And, they have belief systems that are consistent with their physiology. And they transition from self-intervention into self-regulation. And I think we can shut down the slides. We don't need those anymore.
And did you want to take a question?
Yeah, that's what I was going to do.
Yeah.
So we have to stop. So questions,
Okay.
any questions you might have? Yes.
I just had a comment on what we were discussing, and something that I utilize, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. And I think it's relevant to the big breathing practices or breath working, is using movement after a big breathing session. But it's also something that I use after public speaking, which is a time when I tend to overbreathe. And as a really quick way to build up CO2 in the system again, and then come back to reflexive breathing. Does that seem like a helpful tool?
Yeah, I'm appreciating what you're saying, because for some people, when they move, they've learned to regulate good respiration, and for others, they haven't. So everybody's unique and different. We've worked with quite a few people who are very involved in sports and have been injured during movement, and that's a trigger for them. And for others, it's not. So everybody's unique. I'm also appreciating what you're saying as well, because it opens the space for, if you feel inclined to move now, or if you feel inviting people into a way that they might enter the space to self-regulate, to move into good respiration. You could explore that with your group if you choose to. You might decide you want to expand on what you're offering in terms of movement.
Again, remembering movement is obviously an experience.
Yeah.
And so it can be a trigger. And it can be a trigger for all kinds of habits. And you don't know what those are until you look for it and explore it with your client.
And I guess it also goes along with an encouragement to be utilizing a reflective breath while engaged in the movement or engaged in the experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just like while I'm talking, I mean, I'm not overventilating. I can tell. I mean, I have a real clarity of consciousness. I would immediately detect it. If there was something going on. It's coordinated. My one objective is to communicate, and the other one is respiration, and they work together.
And what you're saying too is lovely as well, because movement can be big or it can be very subtle. And exploring the range, the subtlety for people may be where big movement is triggering, or vice versa.
Right.
So you can invite how you choose so that you're including more people in that exploration. If there are triggers, and maybe make yourself available if somebody is feeling something uncomfortable as well, to support them in that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, Sandra is in our school, she is the practicum director. She oversees all the practicums of the students who come through the program. She's been doing it for years and years. She's actually the director of education at the graduate school.
We'll take two quick questions and we have to wrap up. Okay, so.
Thanks. Okay, so I have a broader question from my experience. So when I had my CO2 tested with Wolf, it was good. It went to 40. And then he made me do the exercise that I do every day, which is basically 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. So it's a practice I do for 45 minutes every morning as a meditative practice. And then my CO2 levels dropped significantly. And as I explained to Wolf, when I do this, so I do this for 45 minutes, then followed by exercise for 45 to an hour, and then I get ready for work, I shower, and then I sit down for work, and I'm exhausted. Just no focus, I just want to go to bed. But if I just exercise, get ready for work, and sit down, I'm not as exhausted. So he was explaining to me it's most likely due to this drop in CO2 from my breathing practice. So if I have good breathing normally, and I'm doing this daily practice, which is 45 minutes, is quite lengthy, and I'm doing this every day, am I long-term affecting my breathing or my respiration? Or because it's simply 45 minutes and I'm not doing it all day long, am I not compromising my respiration?
You know, I would say to you, first of all, you're not going to hurt yourself. What I would be concerned about is whether it is the basis for having learned a dysfunctional habit. You often see in yoga, for example, I can't tell you how many people we've seen who are yoga masters, or that's been a huge part of their lives, where they have learned dysfunctional habits, severe, really bad dysfunctional habits as a result of their yoga practice. Because they're focused on the mechanics. They're not paying any attention to their experience from the standpoint of respiration. But, if you do that, and how far did your CO2 levels go down? They were 40, what did they go down to?
I think it dropped down to about 30.
Okay, so that's a significant drop. It's 10
Yeah.
millimeters.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not going to hurt yourself. It's a question you want to be sure that that doesn't translate into some other area of your life where you overventilate, and that gets you into trouble around maybe certain symptoms you have, headaches, or if you have any of those things, or brain fog where you can't seem to remember in certain situations and so on. It may translate by metaphor into something else. You have to remember that metaphor is such an important thing in the breath.
Yeah, so when
It's
you talk about the
fundamental.
yogis, for example, who practice this on a regular basis, that's kind of like my broader question is when you develop a practice like this that's daily, ultimately, in the long term, you could affect your
it
respiration if
happens
it was
frequently.
good, and then...
It happens frequently.
Yeah, okay.
And you might keep in mind during your practice, it may be possible to do the practice you do and do it with good CO2 levels. You would just explore the way you're engaging in the practice. Because lots of times we can't see how our teachers are breathing. We're not seeing what they're doing. We don't know if the way they're doing it is sacrificing good respiration, and then there's a price to pay for that. But it may be possible that you can explore, how can I do this practice in a way that works for me and keep my CO2 levels up? And then we were touching earlier on recovery. So being able to recover quickly when your levels do drop, and maybe you would explore that for yourself during
One
the
last
day.
thing is you might learn to do what you're doing without lowering the CO2 level. then you're not going to get into trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll be very brief. I just like to summarize or just draw a different overall picture of that and see how you bounce from that. So in my beliefs, we had a good respiration habits when we were like a child, like unaltered, right? And somehow, while we grew up, the mind or the body got in the way and constructed a bad habit, right? And I resonate a lot with the word trust. So it's to get rid of that bad habit is to tell that part that need that bad habit for a reason. I mean, it's there for a reason, right? The mind or the body got in the way to like, I need that to function in my environment. So I would have to trust, to tell that part that has built that bad habit, it's okay. We actually don't need that. Does that resonate?
What you're saying translates into a good discourse, internal discourse. It's good internal discourse because that's you're translating that physiology into that, which is good. I mean, it's good so that you can, what you're thinking to yourself is consistent with the physiology. And just going back to the childhood, I mean, you theoretically could develop a breathing problem right at birth, literally at that moment of birth when you first start to breathe, you could develop a bad breathing habit. Bad breathing habits can be learned in seconds. Like a guy I knew, this track star at UCLA, he came out of surgery on his ankle and he had problems coming out of the anesthesia and then developed this horrific problem. He learned it in just, seconds. So you can learn it as a baby. You could learn dysfunctional breathing in no time flat, very easily. You get a phobia embedded in the breath. It becomes really problematic.
It's okay to shift if you want to, if it serves you, rather than thinking of the learning as a bad habit, that my body has learned something, and right now this learning, I can shift this because I want a different outcome. I can always go back to this learning, but it doesn't have to be bad, if that makes sense, unless that serves you in some way.
No, but that was good
I like
dialogue.
being
The
bad.
dialogue that you were engaging in, you were making it real psychologically, and that it's kind of the poetry of it that can be consistent with really what's happening. I mean, it can be a very good thing. What you say to yourself is vital in all of this work.
All right, let's put your hands together for Sandra Riemer and Dr. Peter Litchfield. Wow. Yeah. I could have these guys here all day, every day, all week, every week, because I think the work that they do and the way that they explain it is so important to us in what we're doing in our practices. And really about changing our habits, I think we've got to know where we are first. And that's why this instrument, this technology, this advancement that we have today in our hands, it gives us real information, real time. That's our baseline. That's where we got to start. So let's not get in the way, but sometimes you might need to get in the way, but first of all, you've got to know where you are. So that's what I take from some of this. They're going to be around. I think we've got a 10-part episode with the amount of content we've got from Sandra and Peter. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take a 5-10 minute break, and we're going to start straight after with our next session. So if you can just freshen up and be back here in 10 minutes, and then we'll start. But let's hear it again for Sandra and Peter. Thank you so much.